Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Reinsurance Podcast. I am your co-host, Jerad Lee.
And I'm Ben Rose. And you join us midway through a discussion that we decided should be continued on air.
Straight into our tangent today.
Where we were about.
Like many of our tangents, this is fashion-related.
Yeah, but it's important because as I was trying to justify why it should be included in our podcast, because, we've come from a place where pre-pandemic, the range of clothing options available to most people in our industry were relatively limited. You can have shorts and long socks if you're in Bermuda, but otherwise again, there's obviously various sort of gender stereotypes applied to what you can wear. But for myself, certainly the pandemic was a big escape from that opportunity to find new means of expression through what I would wear. Lower half as much as upper half on Zoom calls.
Well, we should spend an entire episode
on fashion,
on just industry fashion.
Reinsurance Fashion Week.
But what was once you don't have to wear a tie in Lloyd's anymore debacle and scandal to everyone's in sweatpants and nobody really cares. We've had a bit of a roller coaster these last 20 months.
And I realized by being regularly filmed and put on the internet wearing various items of clothing, maybe we are setting some kind of standard, maybe a low bar. As long as you're more smartly dressed than the guys on the Reinsurance Podcast, that's okay with us.
But listeners and viewers know that it's always shot from above the waist, so
this is true.
We still keep our pandemic vibes going with.
Indeed. No, but I was just complaining about how my shirt had not been folded very well, and as a result, I have this glorious sort of fold line.
I would posit it's been folded too well.
Yeah.
The efficiency and quality of your fold is the result of your crease.
And it's that kind of change in perspective that we hope to bring to you today.
It is those earth-shattering perspective shifts that we will now dive into on the process of buying reinsurance, essentially, is what we wanted to. As the Reinsurance Podcast, we don't talk enough about sort of the origin of why the client's beginning to think about the purchase and how that price comes to bear and the things that drive how much they're paying, what drives those elements, how they think about the various products that they might buy. So I think we want to dive more into that specifically today.
And I think also we spend a lot of time talking about the pain of doing it and that sort of thing in other episodes. So maybe we won't spend all the time on that, but actually shift to more towards what it should be like and could be like, and how meaningful it can be as well. Because I think we'll come on to this a bit, but a lot of the things, a lot of the time we see the Ceded function or the reinsurance purchasing function as like a cost center with a job to do, and not enough reflection given on just how impactful that function is across organizations in terms of kind of top line as much as bottom line, actually, which people don't realize, because at the end of the day, they're the ones choosing how much premium you keep as a business, and also how much you choose to cede away, and then how much recovery you could potentially get on that transaction. So it'd be interesting to reflect a bit on sort of the full why raison d'etre of this function, and not just like, oh well, it's a job we got to do.
Well, and I think you're right. If we look at it, make a comparison to a sort of traditional cost center, it's very obvious that they have to go and they have to buy this thing. They need to buy IT software. They need to buy the tools to make their operation work. They need to go and do these basic things, but that's not quite the same underlying framework that the Ceded function exists within, right? You have it where they're trying to optimize the top line opportunity that they have, right? Oftentimes using what they're buying reinsurance on to help them grow into new classes or geographies or similar. They're trying to optimize how much they give away. If it's super profitable business, they don't want to cede away too much of it. So all of these things kind of driving it, where it's very different than we need this many people to operate our HR function, or this many, this is our IT budget for our core systems are similar, right?
Yeah, and I think actually framed like that, this is something which you could talk about in a number of departments actually, and something which we'll do the lens on the reinsurance department, because this is the Reinsurance Podcast. But what we're talking about here is how you get from, in finance, for example, being the CFO or the finance team that makes sure the business doesn't run out of money and does okay and adds up some numbers, to transforming the whole way the business operates, taking it to IPO, leveraging things that have never before been leveraged in such a way that your business, completely transforms. We want to talk about how the reinsurance department can move across that spectrum as well, depending on how it's organized, depending on the resources it has, etc.
Yeah. Well, and I think that role also highlights why it oftentimes sits within the board or directly reporting to the board, because it's as critical a component of their overall business and the strategy of what they're trying to do as anything else might be. So maybe we should take a step back and think about if you're starting an insurance company from scratch, right? If you have that sort of zero legacy mantra of some of the net new insurers that we've seen, Convex, for example, popping up, what does that function look like when you can build it as a foundational part of your business, and comparing that to a business that's grown quite massive over time and has sort of had this natural evolution of that core function. There might be a nuance as to how they think about, we want to go and do these things, and here's how we're going to leverage and utilize our reinsurance purchasing to complement that and to ensure we get the security ratings, maybe from an S&P or AM Best to drive that growth, but also to ensure that we're able to put down competitive line sizes. And all of these things are sort of central to why this function exists and its strategic value it has to an organization.
Absolutely. I think there probably is a reinsurance maturity curve in terms of the role it can play for your business in some ways. Everybody imagine a visual diagram of what I'm about to try and describe. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily tied precisely to how new the firm is, because obviously some of the startups in the space are often, starting with insane amounts of capital, full teams of people, and they really know what they're doing, right? So not necessarily mapped to that. I wouldn't say that the newest firms are the least mature, etc. But the earliest role reinsurance plays is almost a regulatory one, right? In the sense of, you need to meet a solvency capital requirement. You need to be able to demonstrate to regulators, to rating agencies, etc., and to your customers ultimately that you are not, as an insurer, going to run out of money the moment people start claiming. And a big part of that process is proving that you have adequate reinsurance coverage in place. If you're a startup operating within Lloyd's as well, you have to submit to Lloyd's your reinsurance programs and prove that they are adequate to protect your balance sheet and then also the mutual balance sheet of the Lloyd's chain of security. So that's like basics. Have you got reinsurance? Almost like saying when you are about to do something dangerous, have you got insurance for this dangerous thing? It's that kind of question, right? It's like, oh yeah, don't worry, no, I'm insured for this. Beyond that, though, you start to see sort of the next step. I'm literally making this up, so write to us if you think I'm missing stages, etc. But the next step that jumped out to me was then capital efficiency. So at some point, you're not just buying reinsurance because you have to and because it would be stupid not to, but also because you begin to recognize that for certain areas of your business, it makes more or less sense to hold on to some of the business. You might be sat with in order to make sure I can pay these claims, I'm having to hold this giant pile of capital. It's sat there. I have to hold it in a certain way that means I can't invest it as much as I'd want to, etc. Maybe actually I can buy reinsurance and hedge and use it in a slightly more efficient way rather than having to hold this giant pile of capital, which reduces my return on overall equity, etc.
Yeah, well, and that economic viability is why you will see reinsurance programs evolve. So if we go back to that sort of net new insurer, think of like a Lemonade, for example, is an easier one. But V1 is very heavily quota share focused, right? It's the easiest product. It's easier to sort of have that sort of partnership with their reinsurers. But as brands build their experience and the understanding of their books and understanding how their book is performing and all these little nuances, they might start shifting away from that towards a slightly more economically viable based on the risks that they're facing. Or if if they're naturally quite diversified as an organization, they might buy in one way, but if they're a bit more homogenous, they kind of do a couple lines and everything is there, they might buy differently. And this is all driven by the economic viability of, is this the best way to deploy our capital for the target outcomes we're trying to achieve?
Absolutely. And then there's another step, I think, beyond that as well, which is how do you start to monetize your reinsurance? Mm-hmm. This is an interesting one, right? That I think everybody misses this at a outside of the department level. I think some reinsurance departments do a better job of marketing this, but as a cedent, you are an originator of risk for reinsurers, mm-hmm. and you can get paid for that.
Yep.
Right. What reinsurers want essentially is access to risk. And if you provide reinsurers with access to risk that they can hopefully turn a profit on, then they will pay you risk-free commission in the case of quota shares, yep. in exchange for you having, won some insurance business, managed the claims for said insurance business, run call centers, run whatever else you need to run to support that business so that capital flows into these big reinsurers. So actually, money-making part of reinsurance, we should write more of this because we can actually sell it to reinsurers.
Yeah.
Effectively, obviously, whilst maintaining trust that you're doing good business,
yep.
that they'll want to keep on
from
you.
Yeah, and we've talked before about how reinsurance is entirely bespoke, right? And one of the things you'll see there in that sort of ceding commission lens you just outlined, which I think you're right, is something that people miss the value of a lot. But you also have then like, well, I don't want to give you a really big ceding commission if the business isn't very good, but I would reward you if it performed amazing. So it's like, why don't we introduce a sliding scale where if it's very 50% loss ratio, you get paid one percentage. But if this is like a hugely profitable book of business, and you're just literally giving it to me for free as a reinsurer, I'm happy to pay you a greater percentage of that. And you further align the incentives of that insurer to write good business and the reinsurer to sort of remunerate them accordingly. And I think you're right. Those things are missed massively in the value. As a quick deviation, I don't know where your list is going to stop. Again, we don't rehearse these things, so I don't know where your list ends. But we talk a lot about sort of the cost of your reinsurance and getting the best price for it. And in many ways, the cost that you incur by having bad or unstructured data and these types of things. And I think that's also one of the points that's impacted by ceding commissions, going, if the data is not very good and the reinsurer doesn't really know what they're going to get, they might just push your ceding commissions down, right? So it's not a direct cost of, oh, your spend was higher, but the amount of income you were able to make on that book of business has been impacted. It is less than it should have been because you couldn't have sold the correct narrative to your partners there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it really is a beauty contest there in terms of which cedent does the reinsurer want to allocate their capacity to across its broad portfolio of lots of different cedents. So it might be that you only get a small commitment at a given rate from reinsurers at large or from the best reinsurers, because you're not effectively positioning your portfolio in the right way. So absolutely, we've got to make sure then, if I just sort of recap, initially, got to buy reinsurance for regulatory reasons to make sure you don't go out of business. If you're sensible, you'll make sure that you don't have to hold too much capital as well, and you're able to achieve a hedge where your returns are going to be large relative to your capital base. Possibly and hopefully you'll find ways to also monetize all of your operations, your role in the value chain as an insurer of generating a huge portfolio of a float, insurance business, and then being able to share that with the reinsurance markets on a sort of hopefully a rate of good return. And then I think one of the peak maturity curve elements for me, which can also sort of loop back to early stage businesses, is using reinsurance as a partnership method of entering new markets or tackling new products, or being able to go where no one has gone before through the power of our wonderful reinsurance industry, with its heavily diversified and scale enormous kind of size.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It's almost as if at a certain point you've earned the right to go and do new things, right? Where if you're brand new and you're saying we're going to do all of these various things, that lends itself to a lack of focus, and it's harder to underwrite with quality all of those various classes, etc. But as you're right in saying, as you sort of grow in your maturity, you can then say, well, we've done these, say 5 or 6 or 10 things very, very well and very profitably. We now want to do X, and here's our track record of doing the other things we've done really well. It's easier for you to get reinsurers to partner with you on your journey to do that net new thing, because you've proven you can hire the right teams and deploy the right sort of operational models and the target operating models and all of these types of things in order to do that, right? So again, you can then utilize it to help you deliver on that, and then kind of back, as you sort of allude to, back to then the start of that journey and that new product that joins the others as it goes through the chain of its development.
And perhaps, I mean, to your point, and this building up over time, there's maybe another axis of this maturity curve is also trust from your reinsurance partners. Like, to get the basic regulatory coverage, everyone understands why you're buying that, and there's plenty of people who are happy to supply that. If it's more of a capital efficiency play, slightly higher bar in terms of like, okay, you're doing a deal here, potentially, not just for making sure you don't go bust, but actually there's a bit of a hedge here that we're both making, that we need to go in with our eyes open on. So the trust has got to be a bit higher. Then if it's like, hang on, you want to actually charge us a commission for this business? We really need to trust that you're doing a good job here, and that this business is going to be worth our while. And then right the way to, you want to go into this place that nobody's gone before. We've got to have a really solid foundation to see this as, follow the fortunes, going into the unknown together as partners. And I think what underpins all of this is time and time again over the gradual year after year type relationships we have in reinsurance, is that ability to do what you say and say what you do time and time again. I guess the most important pieces of which, aside from the sort of regular interactions of the individuals involved who, come and go to some extent, is, does your submission pack and your narrative line up each year? And do you execute what you say you're going to do? A bit like politicians in some ways, right? You almost do a manifesto and say, elect me and I will do these 5 things. And then if you don't, nobody's going to vote for you again.
Well, yeah, I think there's some things within the insurer that's, it almost, the analogy that I jumped to was more like a publicly traded company, right? The best performing companies oftentimes are ones that say, we're going to do this, and each quarter they're sort of hitting or slightly over, delivering on the goals that they sort of set out. And it's just consistent each time. They're not radically overshooting what they stated, because sometimes whilst they make it a spike, it might also significantly recalibrate what the street might expect for them to do. So the best performing companies over a longer time is sort of building the trust with the street that, look at them, they're going to deliver what they're saying they're going to do, and they have great clarity as to what drives their business forward, what moves the metrics that they're tracking and that they care about. Very similarly for the insurers as they go into the reinsurance market, going, here's what we said we're going to do, right within that margin of error of what we thought we were going to do. Here's the data's consistent and backs it all up. Here's the things that are driving it. Here's the risks we're solving for. And sure enough, they're buying reinsurance that's addressing those core risks to their business. Like, it's all just showing that they're bundled up, right? And of course you want to partner with a company like that, right? You alluded to before this sort of concept of a beauty pageant, which I think is actually super accurate, because the reinsurers, even in a soft market, there's finite capacity of where they can deploy their capital. And they can choose amongst all the insurers worldwide, and they might have a diversification strategy themselves, but they're going, who are the partners who we can trust the most to deliver us on our objectives as well? And absolutely, they're going to go with the companies that are just buttoned up, who know what's going on, they know what drives their business forward, they have clarity and control of their data. Absolutely, that's the company who's going to get the most capacity, the largest line sizes, the most support when they're going to new places. It seems obvious, right?
Yeah, completely. And I don't want to sort of go into this, because I think we'll probably do an episode later on that covers the full results of it. But we're currently doing a fair amount of research and a ton of interviews with senior underwriters and actuaries and so on around how they respond to uncertainty in data.
Yeah.
And just some of the findings have been amazing, like far beyond what we expected in terms of like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that's the level of skepticism we're at as a market at the moment. So, for example, companies coming to the underwriters with premium estimates, and the underwriters saying, like, yeah, we just ignore it.
Yeah.
We don't even bother to open it because we don't trust them.
Yeah.
Because we've got all their historical data, and they say this number, and then actually a different number happens, and then they restate it the next year, and it just doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. Yeah. So we stop listening to them, and we just give them a market price that we think is going to make us money in the end.
Yeah.
And that's importantly contrasted with the clients where they do have the trust.
Yep.
And where they fight to justify to their internal, approvers or teams at underwriting committee or otherwise, why they should make a special effort to get on that panel to give a better price for the clients they do trust. And they'll hold up their data and say, but look at this, look at why they're special. There's just this gaping chasm between the way that cedents with good data are treated and the way that cedents with slightly uncertain or questionable data are treated.
The premium estimate one is a really interesting exhibit to sort of dive into, because if you think about how the process currently works, and for those of you who haven't sort of gotten into the weeds of the renewal data, oftentimes this is a data cut that's taken 6 to 9 months before the renewal period starts. And you look at sort of the complexity of the macroeconomic climate that insurers work within, but they're saying, as at the end of July 2023, I'm going to make a prediction on what we're going to do for all of our insurance purchasing from 1st of January 2024 to the 31st of December 2024, based on the data from July 2021 to July 2022. Like it begins to be like, well, we missed it by 40. It was like, of course you missed it, because you're trying to predict so far in advance, like what's happening with the book of business, where if we can get to a point, and I think some of this is more optimistic than where we currently are as a business, but if we can make it where those data cuts occur nearer to the renewal season, so you're saying, listen, we're going to write 1st of January 2024 business, but the data is going to be from sort of November 2022 to November 2023, I have a much greater confidence in the accuracy, because I'm only a month or two out versus 18 months to 6 months out.
Yeah.
Like that's tough.
I think this lateness characteristic in a way, or latency almost, is probably a defining characteristic for a lot of firms in the way they buy their reinsurance at the moment. And it's such a missed opportunity. On one hand, you've got this data element, the lag in when the data is coming from, and how it can be then used to work out how much reinsurance you should buy, first of all, and also whether your reinsurance partners are going to feel willing and confident and able to support you as much as they actually could.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, in addition to this as well, the latency affects the way in which structures for reinsurance buying are determined. So we talked a lot about data in the past and how it sucks up everybody's time, and everybody spends months and months and months preparing their packs, which is a bit of a joke in the modern age. Again, technology out there to sort that. But what it means, and what people miss, is the knock-on impact, is that you have reinsurance buying teams and their brokers forced to basically recycle structures that were designed for them when they were in a completely different phase of their maturity. So going back to your example of, early startup insurer to later stage insurer to insurer that's acquired a ton of entities all over the world to insurer that's now a market leader, and they're still using the same XOL tower that they were using, 7 years earlier, with barely any tweaks to it, because each time they've come to renewal, that structure discussion, by the time they've arrived at that point, it's too late. Yeah. A buyer I was speaking to the other day, if you're listening, you know who you are. I explained it to me as like, figuring out what structure we should use is always step 9. However, we always find ourselves, on step 7 in the middle of December, and so we always have to sort of skip steps 8, 9, and 10 and hurry them through and just repeat what we did last year, because we've spent so long doing all of the finding data to answer questions or figuring out why things don't add up, etc. And it's such a waste, because if you were able to have the space to think, okay, what is actually going to be the optimum structure for me to get those returns we talked about from your reinsurance programs, maximize your recoverables, minimize your change in premium. If there's an opportunity to give away less premium to the reinsurers, or an opportunity to give away more in exchange for more commission or more profitably, you're just missing out on that conversation at the moment. People aren't even having the conversation because they can't.
Yeah. Well, and I think these are conversations that the practitioners, both on the broking and the ceding side, will be very familiar with. But a few things will happen, right? If the market conditions are quite soft, you'll see subtle changes, but ones that matter. It's like, oh, we can push for more ceding commissions because the market's soft, or we can maybe do a multi-year treaty this time around because the market conditions are soft, or we can push for more inclusions around clauses because market conditions are soft, and the market conditions hard, and it's like we're just going to claw all those things back, right? And that's not doing enough of a service to the industry of what we can do. The other thing that you see happen a lot, maybe a lot's not the right word, but the other thing you see happen is where post-renewal, a cedent and the broker will sit down and they'll look at new structures, what they could have done at a renewal season, and they'll plan alternate or change structures for the next year. But whilst that's the thing that they're looking to do the subsequent renewal, what happens then is as they get to a renewal, enough has changed in the market that they actually renew what they had expiring.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I've seen this happen several times where we were going to, combine these layers. We were going to move the tower around. We are going to do this thing. But when it push comes to shove and you get this year's data and the timing gets constricted and the broker is going to have to explain or sell that to all of the markets who were on the panel last year, like begins to be too much for the window of time that they're given. And they kind of go, okay, we'll roll that back. We'll renew it again as expiring. And that deal might come to fruition, that new structure might come to fruition the next year. But these sorts of bigger and more ambitious changes sometimes have a year or 2 year delay to them because of that latency challenge that you've addressed.
Yeah, and I think that latency is a double-edged sword as well. Because triple, you might argue.
It's a dangerous
yeah,
triangular weapon.
Very violent weapon. So a triple-edged sword in the sense that it means the work that's taking ages with the data means the cedents come to market late with the changes that they'd like, in theory. The brokers then have to start their work, benchmarking, etc., figuring out, how much a structure like this is likely to cost. Too late to get going, and then they have to do that as well as starting late with data that's not very good, which means it takes them longer.
Yep.
And already you're seeing the delays seep into the process, which means that at the final point when the reinsurance underwriters catch wind of this new idea or that there's something to change, one, they haven't got as much time as they would like to do it because it's coming to them very late at the busiest time of the year. But two, because that data at the end of the day isn't very good, they don't have the tools or the time to actually process it in a straightforward way. Meaning that even if they did have a bit more time, it wouldn't be a very feasible task for them to undertake to completely redo the way that they model the business, because for them, why should they make a special effort to go digging through your 50-tab spreadsheet that doesn't really line up with last year and has lots of idiosyncrasies that are different for every client on it? I contrast that with a client that provides really clean and consistent data, gets it to brokers early. Brokers can explore a range of structures, get to the reinsurers earlier. The reinsurers open it and go, oh, this data's really easy, goes straight into my system. Yep. They can actually then talk about a much wider range of options. And I think those are where you see the sort of segment leaders coming in at the moment.
I think there's another fold of nuance in that where there's hopefully some reinsurance underwriters sort of shouting at their podcast app of the device of choice that you're listening to us from.
Whilst on public transit.
Yeah, exactly. But there's a reinsurer somewhere going, no, that won't apply to us. Like, we've got a bunch of really powerful tools that can get this data in. We can turn around even new structures super quickly when they come in from our clients. Fair. But you're not the only reinsurer on the panel. And the thing that the brokers and the clients need to do is fill up the capacity. So even if, after all of that scenario that you laid out, which I absolutely agree with, you get it where the lead reinsurer is like, nope, we understand this, we can still price it. You still need to get the 5, 10, 50 following markets to also agree.
Yeah.
And if those kind of guys go, well, sure, the Munich or the Rennes or the Swiss team, they can price it and they're comfortable with that new structure. For our 5% line, we don't quite understand how this would work. We can't quite model it in the same way. We're going to decrease our line size, or we're going to, like, those are the sort of knock-on complexities that occur and exist when you have these sorts of things coming into the market. So it's not just can the bigger, more sophisticated reinsurers who might be leading the deal get on board with it. You also have to have time to get the knock-on markets to also come to play. And that's not as easy as you might think.
Yeah, and it's funny as well. We talked, I mean, we always talk quite regularly with sort of reinsurance innovation people in particular. And the theme that keeps on coming back time and time again is just how poised and ready the reinsurers are to launch a new initiative or, you know, uncover a new data stream, etc., and then find themselves getting stuck because the input data is garbage. You know, the classic garbage in, garbage out is probably the most common expression we hear, right? Where reinsurers actively want to make a special case for you, the individual cedent, to get special treatment, to defy the model, to get discounts, to be treated specially. There's like a willingness and an excitement to be able to use, you know, your data to help you and to be able to justify your case, especially if you've got a good relationship with them as well.
It's a pleading, help me help you kind of thing.
Yeah, like, it really is. Help me help you. That's exactly the way to put it. Like, again, so many people have been coming to us and saying that we really want to help these guys get like as much of our capacity as possible. Yeah. But they shoot themselves in the foot so frequently because the data they provide means that actually you can't quite provide it. And actually you begin to question your instincts as an underwriter. You begin to say, why haven't they provided this? They must have known this in order to have underwritten the business in the first place. So why are they not sharing it with me? What are they hiding? Now I'm worried. Now I don't trust my gut anymore. And now I'm going to start loading the price.
And we've sort of talked about the sort of forthcoming white paper that we're currently researching and having conversations with, and email us if you want to be involved with that. But one of the comments that I heard was very much this position, which I think is sort of universally shared, which is nothing that I don't know is good. Right? If there's something that's been hidden or isn't there, there's like my gut is like, that is a bad thing. Whatever I don't know is not good. And so the more that you're filling that submission with things that your partner doesn't know about, that's the default assumption that they will have, and as they should, right?
The devil you know.
Yeah, exactly. But I think when we go back to the conversations we have as an industry with the innovation heads and people trying to push the industry forward, one of the things that we, I think, do poorly is we leap very quickly towards like the utopian end state of like, wouldn't it be great if, and then insert all manner of super exciting things, but just not really feasible, at least in the near term window. And then get very disheartened when things don't work, right? The industry shift to blockchain, great example, right? Or I was at a conference maybe a couple of years ago now, but they were talking about the move away from being paper file based, and instead of just kind of going, wouldn't it be helpful if we could just ingest the data on our computers? It was a Minority Report, glass walls with why though? Like we should just start with things that aren't sexy but are important. Like every year my data looks the same and it's easy to track how it's moving and it's formatted in the same structure and I can ping that file over and the recipient goes, oh, it's exactly how it looked last year, but the numbers have been updated and I'm looking at this year's. Like it's not the sexiest thing in the world, but it matters, right?
Well, this is the funny thing, and it's the whole, don't try to run before you can walk sort of exactly. Scenario. But massive tangent. Just because I've seen it recently. Have you seen that like flying cars are real now?
No, I've seen like those individual like one-person drones.
No, so this is a new. I mean, aviation underwriters eat your heart out at this point, but our whole lives, in my generation at least, there's been, I guess it's a Jetsons sort of thing actually. Thinking about it, but this concept that one day there'll be flying cars, and everyone's like, yeah, okay, maybe. Yeah. and nobody's ever really taken that concept seriously. And I'm not suggesting that I'm now imagining that any day now there'll be flying cars in the sky everywhere. I'm sure there's plenty of small steps to be worked out first. But there was one recently featured in Slovakia. Slovakia have made a flying car that they've done various test flights with, and looks very cool and seems to work very well. That flies very much like a plane, so it takes off as a commercial airliner would.
Yeah.
But then just last week, I think it was, not to give you a clue as to when this podcast was recorded, in the US, the aviation authority, whose name I don't know, civil aviation authority of some sort, I actually gave an airworthiness.
FDA?
I don't know. But they gave an airworthiness license to a mass-producible flying car that can take off and land vertically, which is super cool.
Yeah.
But also is road legal as a car. I'm like, we're actually, one step at a time.
Yeah.
Something that has been around our whole lives as like this made-up one-day concept. We're actually getting to the point where that imaginary thing, we're chipping away at it.
Yeah.
Gradually getting there.
Getting there.
Yeah.
For those of you listening to us whilst you drive, ignore that car that's broken down on the side of the road and think about that from the sky.
Yeah, exactly. The future is coming, one small step at a time.
We are going to bookend this podcast with 2 tangents. just chocolate for your listenership ears. That's the time we've got today, so we will dive into more aviation-related risk in the next Reinsurance podcast. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And hopefully you're listening to this as an archive episode in many years' time from the audio speakers of your flying car.
In which case, hello from the past.
Yeah. See you soon.